Hello and welcome back to another Hallowoods weekly Q&A behind the scenes live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in as always, not just to the show, but also to these little behind the scenes featurettes, if they can be so generously called. This week has been pretty great for working behind the scenes of Hello from the Hallowoods season 4. At this point, writing for the show is going very swimmingly, and so we're several episodes ahead on that front. And then kind of just filling in episodes week by week in terms of production. It's definitely helped for this season that so much of the kind of work with the guest stars has been done in advance, which means, there's a somewhat smaller portion of weekly work to do from episode to episode than there usually is. And it's nice to have all the big guest segments squared away. By now, I think it's become apparent that we have 3 kind of recurring voices every episode, in addition to my own. We have the excellent Jimmy Yamaguchi from the Siltverses in as the auditor at the start of each episode. My own dear sister, Libby Wellman, in as Clement, reprising a role as Clem Maidstone from season 1. And then lastly, we have the excellent Evan Michael Lee, who right after getting, finishing recording for Merylmar Reborn and Reborn, immediately announced being part of, I think, Fortnite, possibly a Lord of the Rings game and possibly an Avengers game. So a bunch of really cool video game roles. And it's neat to share elbow space or share voice talent with that. But yeah, that said, season 4 is now kind of where I wanted it to be, which is coming out at a smooth and steady pace. It's much more manageable in terms of workload than season 3 typically was. And things are happening a lot more sort of relaxed and on pace and not sort of rushing to the last minute for every episode. The episodes are usually done at least around 2 weeks in advance, which is perfect. So that said, now that we're kind of moving along at a steady pace for season 4, it's time to turn the sights to sort of what other Hallowoods project will be cooking up next. And so probably over this week, we'll start laying the groundwork for some other things. Because in addition to having 100 Eyes in the Dark, the first Hallowoods tie-in novel, kind of making its way through the editing process and the publishing industry at this point, and on top of season 4 being produced, there's going to have to be, more books and more projects to kind of keep the gears turning on. And especially with 100 Eyes in the Dark now getting past the point where it needs significant rewrites and now moving into the point where it'll just be a lot more polishing before it's, hits shelves more or less. It'll be time to start developing kind of the next Hallowoods novel, most likely. And there's a number of tiny spin-off projects I would like to do as well, but again, probably over this week will be when the logistics and figuring out the math of which of these projects to actually get work done on will kind of come about. But that said, we have, as usual, some Q&A questions today. So there are a couple in the Ask box, and then after that, I will get to any in the chat that happen to be there. If you are witnessing this in real time, then I think if you click over to the YouTube viewer, you can access the live chat. If you're witnessing this in the future, I regret to inform you, but the time for questions will have passed. However, there will be other Q&As probably that same week that you can submit questions to instead. So that said, we have a question from Indigo. When you first thought of Hallowoods as an overarching story rather than a handful of smaller stories, which season/storyline were you most excited about? This is a tricky one. So the Hallowoods was always intended as an overarching story. The point for all of, especially over season 1, where really the kind of the continuity for the season came together, definitely the point was that all of these perspectives, all of these different characters that were introduced would culminate in something cohesive. They would all cross, it would all come together. The exact like terms of how that happened, I think, weren't immediately clear when introducing them. I didn't necessarily know when writing Nolan and Raku's little introductory story how they would fit into the big picture, or exactly where Diggory and Percy were going after their very first encounter, and so on and so forth. Definitely, things took a lot of shape just by writing stories over the course of the first half of season one, and then by the time it was time to plan the sort of mid-season finale for season one, that was also the point where it was like, okay, we've put all these elements on the board, we've written all these, these tidbits, and they're all finding a way together, but there needs to be a cohesive ending and a cohesive way to sort of to pay off like all this setup that we've done. And so really about halfway through season one, that was the point where it was time to sort of write the fine details of how everything was going to cross. But it was always intention from the start that the story was going to be more than just an anthology. I definitely wanted to give people that question early on for the first couple of episodes of, is it going to tie together? How is it going to tie together? Like, are we going to see these people again? And then watch the kind of the almost like what allow them to connect the dots between stories and start to piece together that these are all parts of larger narrative. So that said, while it was always intentioned as cohesive, I think the storylines that I was, I mean, from the bat, the ones that had probably the most focus, or the most like clear idea of where they were going, was probably Polly, Mort, and Uretzes. I think I'd been idly thinking about a story much like the journey that they kind of went on. I think even before the Hallowoods, really. And so I think from an early like point, kind of their journey of being essentially moving on the hunt, having these kind of encounters that bring them closer together, and getting this kind of dynamic going between them. That I think was pretty clued in from the start. That was one of the ones that I think surprised me less or changed less sort of as it was going. Certainly, I think a few of those kind of things that they hit on the road throughout season one ended up being a little bit bigger than others, or maybe mattering in different ways than I expected. I don't think Rick Rounds was necessarily... I don't think I anticipated when introducing him just like what a character he would continue to be. Because he definitely found, I think, a little bit of a bigger presence and a little bit of a more of an angle to explore in the story than his like introduction would suggest. So that said, in terms of storylines, I think that was one of the ones I was more keen on off the bat. I only had really like a couple of scenes from throughout the first season pictured when it came to really writing those first few episodes. But a meeting between Ethel and Solomon was definitely high up on the list. I knew both of these were going to be fairly strong antagonists. I knew they each had a different sort of angle for what they wanted to do. And so getting to write a scene where they interact and where there are two sort of conflicts sort of meet together, that was definitely on the priority list. Femme Fatale in the chat says, "Happy Easter, Mix Wellman," and chat, just popping in to say hi, and I wish you well. I'm at church, so I'll have to catch the VOD. Yes, by all means, return to the active church service that you are attending, but I hope it goes well. That said, let's see. In terms of seasons, I think that there is a bit of a theming to each season, and that's part of just trying to write this show in a way that keeps me engaged, allows it to keep drawing from different kind of reservoirs of tropes and material to reference, and then also I think keeps it somewhat. I would like to think focused for the audience in that you kind of know what the vibe, what the flavor, what the adventure of that season is supposed to be. Um, and so I think out of the ones I was most excited for, that's hard to say. I definitely was stoked about season two, being kind of the road trip season when we were getting to the end of season one, and it was maybe not entirely clear what shape the next season would take. I think a number of, if I recall what the kind of like commentary from the fans was at that point, a lot of them were expecting like, okay, we're going to keep seeing the cycle of like, a big bad rises, and then we're all going to have to team together and beat up that big bad guy. And I that was a lot of fun to do for season one. It really it went smooth. It went some far smoother than I had anticipated. But that said, we have kind of continued to change up the mode and the framework of each season a little bit. And so I was definitely excited to maybe subvert some of those expectations and deliver something that was a little bit unexpected. And the road trip turned out to be a pretty fun time throughout season two. I will say, I think in terms of like metric quantity of excitement, season four has been a lot of fun to develop and a lot of fun to kind of anticipate, because really since the beginning of season three, like I've kind of known what season four's shape was going to be. But it's been like a year and a half of waiting for the audience to get to actually experience kind of the particular flavor that the most recent season has brought. So that it's been a long build up waiting for that and waiting to get to see people's reactions to that. And so it's been a lot of fun to not only make it and not only kind of wait for the audience to get to see it, but also now for it to hit the public and for people to kind of react to it in each their own fashion. So we have a question from Liam here who says, Happy Trans Day of Visibility. Happy Trans Day of Visibility, Liam. Also, happy Easter, but more importantly, happy Trans Day of Visibility. We have a question, the last in our ask box, and then I see some popping up in the chat. Oh no. Okay. So our last ask box question is from Lizard. And Lizard asks, all the VAs in season 4 have been incredible. Is the reason for Meryl Marr's new voice actor for logistical reasons, in-story reasons, a mix, or something else entirely? So, yeah, I'm glad. I really enjoyed working with all three of these folks, and especially Jimmy and Evan. I think have been some of the most like some of the how to phrase this exactly. We've had a number of voice actors on the show, and so many of them have been so great to work with. But a lot of them have been friends of the podcast or podcast connections that I had, and it's all been relatively like kind of almost like you would invite a friend over to be on your show, and they do their part, they invite you to be on their show, and you do your part. This was one of the first, or in a couple of cases, like some of the voice actors, like Velma Burfield in season 2, I think, were just fans of the show from like Tumblr that wanted to be a part of it and had reached out. And so this was definitely, I think, the most like professional grade that we've reached for voice actors. Obviously, my sister playing one role is like it's the same role that they had played in season 1. Although it's funny because Clem's character has grown up a lot in some ways. But for Meryl Marr Reborn and Reborn, and for the Auditor, both Jimmy and Evan are not necessarily podcast friends hopping on as guests, but they are full voice actors who have studios and fancy setups, and they do things to spec. And so it was definitely a different experience to work with essentially voice acting pros versus the sort of fellow podcast creators that I have appeared on the show most of the time. Um, and it was also, we're starting to do a little bit more. I think for all three of these voice actors this season, these were recorded essentially in real time, corresponding with those actors, providing direction, sort of playing off of each other a little bit. Whereas a lot of the voice acting in past has been what you would call asynchronous, where I record all my lines over here, you record all your lines over there, and then I will stitch them together in the editor to make it sound like two halves of a conversation. Um, Asynchronous is a little bit easier because then nobody has to really schedule anything, but it was worth figuring out the tech side of doing it together, to get to really like interact with the auditor or interact with Evan in real time. So that was phenomenal. Let's see. So, in terms of the reason for Meryl Mar's new V8, it is mostly for story reasons. I enjoyed a bit of the Doctor Who trope that every time this dude comes back, sort of in a different form. Every time that rebirth happens, that there would be a change in voice actors. It was also partially due to wanting to capture a little bit of a different angle of this character. I suppose, I'm so sorry, we've verged way into spoiler content, but that said, we had the phenomenal Jeremy Cobb as Meryl Mar, Garden of the End in the the Star-Crossed Gods live show. That was it. And that was really kind of like a younger take on the character, a younger time, like a different facet of him. And Jeremy portrayed that complexity wonderfully. But coming back now, even though it's only been, a very short amount of time for the perception of these godlike beings, I definitely wanted to kind of give us a different angle or a different facet of his personality and explore that through the voice a bit. There were also some scheduling conflicts for Jeremy to come back, although I did inquire if he'd be interested in being a part of season 3 or season 4. And so all that kind of lends together to, okay, we're going to kind of find a new voice for this incarnation, and then kind of go from there. But I've been really fascinated to see what each of these two talented actors brings to the table in terms of their take on this character and how they portray him. And I've really enjoyed both of their different interpretations, more or less, of who Meryl Mar is. So that will bring us to a couple of questions from chat. MKT says, any characters / interactions that you not plan out in the beginning but happened anyway? Any interactions between characters that got cut? Hope these questions make sense. So I think, to be honest, a lot of the interactions were not necessarily planned out. There's, especially early on in season 1, how certain paths would cross and how certain storylines would develop was not necessarily super clear when it all began. But it was a very explorative writing process for those first couple episodes, and the stakes were low, and there was no audience, and it was just for me. So it was kind of a fun adventure to write out this increasingly elaborate branch network of stories. And I think some of the early ones were really just kind of like these very small light bulb moments of oh, Hector is a body scavenger guy who, has these 2 dogs, and Zelda's son just went missing. So that could be a connection where, okay, we could have this guy come in and have to try and hunt down her, her son. And then that would set those two on the same trajectory, and kind of like their story would be the same story from there. Um, Meanwhile, like, okay, after the instrumentalist tries to, um, break into the scout post and steal that key back from Riot, when that fails, where would he go? What would he be doing? And who would be like someone that would be kind of the target that he's used to going after? And of course, Zelda would be the type to try and pick him up and, make sure that this old guy is okay. And, then he would exploit that. And so there was just a lot of discovery over that early few stages of figuring out, okay, these paths, like, this is now an angle that we can explore. We can get some time with both of these characters together. Then we can split off and we can do, send this character to this group and this character to this group, and we'll explore those storylines for a bit. Um, I think some that have been a little bit less expected. Some of them that have really been like, oh, wait, if these two characters are both bound there, then they would run into each other. We can explore some dynamics that we normally wouldn't get to. So I think there was an episode, spoilers for season 3. Yeah, later in season 3, where Zelda heads off on her own again to try and go fetch Al back from Downing Hill. And she runs into Mr. Raven and Mr. Riding Desk, and they get to all three of them like meet for an episode and interact. And it was one of those combinations where I wouldn't really have put those two groups in a room together, but some of the interactions that you get out of that, and of seeing these characters that normally wouldn't hang out getting to play off of each other, was a lot of fun. I think getting to see a couple of the big groups finally collide in season 3, definitely had some elements of that too. Realizing the things in common that like Riot and Mort, or Diggory and Mort, or Percy and Mort have in common. When some of these characters really haven't met or spent a lot of time together over the course of 3 seasons. And I think Big Mikey and Mort again was not necessarily something I would have like really pegged from the get go. But it turned out to be a really nice scene and a really nice like common ground for them to find throughout their interactions. Um, I'm sure there's been many, many more like unusual crossed paths as well. And there's some of them that haven't, I shouldn't say haven't panned out, but they're easy to forget. The Omen haunts Polly several times throughout season 1 and season 2. And I think that tied back into the story a little bit better at the end of season 2. But like the fact that those two have met, that Polly, Yahtzee, and Morton know where Downing Hill is from like the beginning, like from midway through like season 1. I think another one of those was that Clara meets Lady Ethel in a brief scene towards the end of season 1. And then neither of those, neither of them like really make that relevant again throughout, but it's just true that they've met and that they know who the other is. And so like, it sometimes there's these crossing of paths that matter quite a bit. And then sometimes there's a couple throughout the story where it's like, oh yeah, those two characters know each other, but neither of them just has anything to do with that information right now. So you take what you can get. Beanie in the chat asks, do you happen to remember who Thonsorthon is? I'm making a spreadsheet of all the Hallowoods characters, and there's absolutely zero information about them on the wiki. All I know is that they're indescribable. Yes, if I recall, I think it is. I would have to go scan for more details, but I can tell you this: I believe it's a Nick monologue episode in season 3, It might be one of the ones that where he starts out and then has kind of a breakdown somewhere in the episode, and then monologues for a while. But Nick and Nick, if I'm recalling correctly, I think this is a case where Nick and Nick describes several dead indescribables, and that might be one of them. I can't remember what Thon Sorthon's name tag is. I would have to go check my encyclopedia. But if you're looking for more information, it's in there somewhere. But other than that, this is a character who's kind of mentioned offhandedly once. So I cannot promise when more Thon Sorthon fan club information is bound, I'm afraid. Yeah, but that is about the sum of the information that I have on that. There are a couple, I think, older indescribables that either due to age or due to intervention by the Council of Heavens have sort of died or been forgotten, and I think that might be one of them that Nick and Nick recalls. But that said, I think that will bring us to the end of our Q&A. Thank you so much, everyone, and for tuning in, especially on what I realize is both Trans Day visibility, which I wish all of my trans folks a happy visibility day, and then also Easter Sunday afternoon, which is not a good time for hosting live streams on the internet. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of season 4 as things begin to heat up for our dynamic duo. And I will catch you on the other side for a Q&A sometime in the near future. See ya and take care.